In 1991, a professor confirmed that his hibernation experiment was a success after he woke up a chimpanzee that had been hibernating for 6 months. The next step is to experiment on humans, so Albert and Max volunteer. Albert is a biologist who wants to participate in the advancements of humanity, while Max wants some adventure and time away from his wife and daughter, who are furious that he is leaving him. During the press conference, the professor explains that the couple hibernate for 3 years and that there may be risks because the human body is different from that of a chimpanzee. When they are taken to the hibernation chambers, the boys sneak cigarettes and a flask before sleeping soundly. Years later, Max and Albert wake up and are taken to a strange white room by a group of women who also bring them breakfast. The food is so hard that it cannot be bitten, so one of the women tells him that they are actually bowls of pasta, which mimics the food inside. The boys complain about the lack of taste, but attribute this to a side effect of lethargy. Then Max takes out the cigarettes and the flask, sharing it with Albert as well. A small dessert. In any case, the smoke immediately raises the alarm and the women set out to extinguish it by covering it with foam. Then a doctor and his assistant Lamia come to see the boys, who continue to ask questions about the professor. The women explain that the professor does not exist and that his experiments were abandoned because the world went through another war. Max and Albert are very confused, so the women finally share the details. They have been sleeping for 53 years, which means that it is now 2044. In the end, the war has wiped out all the men, so Max and Albert are alone. Those that remain, confused and scared, the pair try to escape, but the door electrocutes them and knocks them down. When they wake up, Albert concludes that this is the second phase of the experiment and that they are testing their reaction to the psychological shock. Max still can't believe there are no more men and wonders how women reproduce. As Lamia watches, she hears this and explains that they reproduce by parthenogenesis, a true form of asexual reproduction, which does not require fertilization, which is found in many animals. Then, another woman belonging to the genetics faction enters Lamia's workstation and sits down with her things, saying that it is a shame that Lamia left genetics to join the Archeo faction. Before leaving, the woman states that she would be better off giving the boys to genetics. Sometime later, the TV in Albert and Max's room turns on and a girl appears talking about parthenogenesis. So Albert has to explain to Max that babies are created in test tubes. Lamia, he mentions that his method of reproduction is perfect, but Max accuses him of brainwashing the children. At night, Max and Albert think about the years of life they lost and how their family and friends have gone. They plan to never freeze again, comfort each other, and finish the last drops of alcohol. Later, as they watch TV, Max remarks that if they do things right, this place could be a paradise for them. But Albert scolds him for thinking differently in such a dire situation. Then, Lamia comes to check on her health, and Max responds with a flirtatious phrase that Lamia doesn't understand. He then asks if they can take a walk together or even dance as he approaches Lamia, unexpectedly stealing their first kiss. Lamia panics and immediately throws him to the ground before walking away. Once alone, Lamia realizes that she can't stop thinking to the kiss, and something woke up in her. Eventually, the boys are allowed out of the room and taken to the biological sanctuary, where they find embalmed animals that have been victims of radiation. They also found a tree with 2 small apples and ate them. At that time, they were addressed by His Excellency, the head of this company. When asked how old the men are, genetics member Emma explains that the men are technically 86 years old, but because of hibernation they haven't aged physically. Max approaches to introduce himself, but the guards think he is going to attack and remove him. His Excellency tells the guards to free Max and teaches the men some history. He was the professor who invented the M-bomb, a chemical that was supposed to temporarily paralyze male genes to stop the war, but ended up wiping out. Max points out that he and Albert can now take over the ranch, but neither woman is interested. His glory shows the tree and explains that it symbolizes the story of Adam and Eve so that women remember not to miss paradise. He then notices that the apples are missing and angrily orders the guards to take the men into custody. Albert then tells Max that they should run away, theorizing that there must be a better world. Meanwhile, Lamia keeps thinking about the kiss, so she visits the Ancient One, the only person who still remembers the old world. Lamia gives him a jar of strawberry jam to make him talk, and the old man tells stories about the role of men in ancient society. Lamia can't help but admit that there is something charming about Max and Albert, prompting the old man to point out that Lamia must be in love. The old man then asks what will happen to the boys, so Lamia explains that they will go through naturalization, which means they will be operated on to become women. The old man gets angry and says that this is worse than death for them, saying that having the men is the last chance for things to return to normal. Sometime later, Max and Albert are caught spying on a class that brainwashes women with lies about the past. Lamia asks them to sign a form to authorize naturalization, but the men refuse. Albert also mentions that he won't cooperate if they are not given freedom. After Lamia leaves, the roof suddenly opens and the men discover a large group of women staring at them. A discussion begins to decide the future of the men, But instead of a trial, it becomes a debate between the Genetics and Archeo factions. Archeo wants to force men to undergo surgery, while Genetics wants to kill and experiment on them. While the women are voting, Max and Albert come up with a plan to escape. They start kissing the guards, and the mix of shock and excitement hormones makes them pass out. When Archeo and his surgery idea win by a vote, the duo has already left. They walk around the building, kissing every woman who tries to stop them to bring them down. Eventually, they find an elevator and use it to visit different floors, where they find one strange thing after another. When they reach a deep underground area, they discover a mine shaft and several objects on the ground such as a boot, a bottle of alcohol, and a newspaper from 1993. Mentions the beginning of the war. Just then, the security team finds them, so the couple runs and escapes through a dumpster. They land in an abandoned area where anarchists live away from the oppressive regime, allowing them to enjoy forbidden things like music, dancing, and relationships between women. Max and Albert stupidly see two people kissing and are caught by two rebels who think they are government spies, but at the same time the security team comes and attacks. Chaos ensues as the rebels panic and the guards don't know who to arrest first, allowing the boys to escape. In the chaos, the men get separated, but luckily reunite in the elevator, only to be discovered by Lamia. She offers to take him to look outside, but Max is skeptical. Albert reminds them that this is their only chance, so they agree to follow her into a strange room with a periscope. While the men observe, they discover that the women live underground, because outside everything is dark and barren with no chance of recovery soon. Their system still detects at least 300 units of radiation as a side effect of the M-bomb, which means they can't get out. However, Max and Albert prefer to take risks rather than live here. Lamia is disappointed to learn that they will not cooperate and says that he must be a loyal worker. So he alerts security and soon the men are recovered. Emma and another woman congratulate Lamia on her devious plan and give her a pin representing a promotion, but Lamia doesn't feel happy or proud. Lamia is then asked to hand over all the data she has collected on the men because Genetics will resume her work after the boys' escape attempt marks them as dangerous. An angry Lamia tries to object because she was working on a thesis about men, but Emma jokes that they should take her too. Annoyed, Lamia pulls the pins. Meanwhile, Alberti and Moxie prepared for the operation. Their organs will be donated to elderly women, while the rest of their bodies will be synthesized for nutrients because today, there is a lack of sources of protein. To Max's surprise, one of the surgeons is his daughter, who is now old and resentful of her father for abandoning her. Before starting the operation, Lamia sneaks into the operating room to avenge Genetics by sabotaging the surgery and helping the children escape. The trio reached the elevator, but Albert fainted from being injected with anesthesia. He suddenly wakes up in 1994 to find the professor telling him that the experiment worked wonderfully. Albert confides that he dreamed of a world without men, and Max replies that he had the same dream. The professor tells him that it is impossible, which causes Albert to wake up, and is in the elevator with Max and Lamia. Lamia then takes them back to the periscope room, where she threatens the guards and forces them to withdraw. Special combinations. After the boys get dressed, Lamia tries to use the system to bring them to the surface, but a guard says a password is required and only His Highness knows it. Frustrated, Max curses loudly and the computer reacts because that curse word turns out to be the password. At that moment, Lamia decides to accompany them and also wears a costume. The trio carefully examines the scary area until they come across a barrier, only to realize it's made of cloth. They use a knife to cut and go through it, which allows them to discover the truth. The world is fair, and what they saw in the periscope was a scary room with a painted desert to brainwash the citizens of the underground base. The group explores the beautiful nature and enjoys the warmth of the sun until they realize that the clothes are starting to run out of oxygen. Suddenly, Max sees a bird fly by and takes off his clothes, confirming that the air is fine. After the others take off their costumes as well, they continue forward and find a wall, which they climb to reveal a beautiful house. They immediately get comfortable and take fresh food from the fridge, surprising Lamia with its incredible taste. Meanwhile, at the underground base, Emma volunteers to take a risk and put on the suit to follow the group. Eventually, he finds the house and sees the trio, but at that point he passes out because his suit is losing oxygen. Albert picks her up and takes her home to help her regain consciousness. When she wakes up, Emma tries to get back to the base and starts fighting Albert to escape. His movement causes him to accidentally turn on the television, which shows an official government broadcast announcing that Lamia and Emma they died. Then there is an interview with a fake Max and Albert, who say they are happy to be women now. This tells Emma that her government has brainwashed her, so she agrees to stay with Albert while Max takes Lamia into a room so she can finally do the dirty work. Sometime later, Max and Albert hear the sound of an elevator arriving and they hide to watch His Highness enter the house, which is theirs. When he finds two dirty glasses, he opens the cabinet and sees Max, so he tries to escape. Albert and Max immediately jump on him and defeat him, But in the struggle, his clothes are torn and his armor falls off. To his surprise, His Excellency turned out to be a man in disguise. He explains that he was only 4 years old when the war ended and the Women's League took over. The few remaining boys were operated on, but their mother hid them to save them. As he grew up, he began to dress as a woman and joined the League, eventually becoming its leader. The radiation was not as bad as they expected, but it was difficult to change what an indoctrinated crowd had been taught. Albert and Max then offer a deal. They will keep this child's true identity a secret and, in return, they will let him live in the house with Lamia and Emma. His Excellency gladly accepts, admitting that he is afraid of women. Sometime later, Max and Albert sneak back into the underground base, disguised as Women Lab. They added his seeds in the vials of the incubator, hoping to change the future. 9 months later, a nurse wraps a newborn in blankets and screams when she discovers a baby.